Welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. And we are diving into some breaking news today because former President Trump just dropped some tariffs and kind of shook things up.
Yeah, this is a big one.
It is. And I mean, needless to say, the internet is already on fire. So that's where we're going to start today, right? We're looking at what people are saying on X, formerly Twitter, of course.
Yeah.
And we've got this in-depth analysis by the Tax Foundation and some reactions from experts at Brookings and CNBC.
Yeah, got a lot of ground to cover.
We do. But I think what we're really looking for today is, we've got these tariffs, a 25% hit on goods from Canada and Mexico,
Wow.
and 20% on everything coming in from China.
A big chunk of our imports.
It is, and it's all happening, just announced today, March 4, 2025. So it's hot off the presses.
Fresh out of the oven.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So, what we're trying to figure out is what are the potential ripple effects of this?
Right.
Is this going to be a short-term economic boost, or are we looking at, some serious long-term consequences?
Yeah, are we going to look back on this and say, what were they thinking? Or was this a genius move that nobody saw coming?
Yeah, right, exactly. And I think that's where the Tax Foundation analysis is really interesting.
Right.
Because, these tariffs are meant to protect U.S. industries, right?
Right.
But, the report kind of suggests this mixed bag of potential outcomes.
Yeah, it's not a slam dunk either way.
No, not at all. And so, for example, that there's the possibility of a short-term boost in, certain sectors like steel and aluminum manufacturing.
Sure, those are the industries that are really being targeted by these tariffs.
Right, exactly. But then on the flip side, they're also suggesting that we could see a GDP reduction.
Okay, so a slowdown in the overall economy.
Yeah, and potentially job losses and even a spike in inflation.
Yeah, if those costs get passed on to consumers.
Right, so it's not as simple as just protecting American jobs then.
It's way more complicated than that.
Yeah, so the Tax Foundation report actually puts some numbers on those potential downsides.
They do.
So let's talk about that.
Okay, let's dive in.
All right, so first off, GDP reduction. What are they projecting?
So they're projecting a 0.4% reduction in GDP.
Okay, and that might sound small, but what does that actually mean?
Well, it might sound small, but when you're talking about the entire U.S. economy, it actually reflects a decrease in the total value of goods and services produced in the U.S.
So it's a sign that the overall economy could actually shrink?
Potentially, yes.
Got it. So less economic activity overall.
Right.
And what about those job losses that everybody's talking about?
Yeah, that's a big concern.
What's the Tax Foundation saying there?
Well, they estimate that nearly 350,000 jobs could be lost.
Wow. And that's on top of, potential price increases because they're also predicting that inflation could jump up by as much as 5.1%.
It's a significant jump.
Huge. So that means that the cost of goods and services could increase significantly.
Yeah, and that's going to hit people's wallets hard.
Yeah, 5.1% inflation would definitely impact everyone's budget. And, this reminds me of some of the posts that I saw on X where people were worried about the prices of everyday things going up, like groceries and gas.
Yeah, I've seen those posts too. People are really worried about the cost of living.
Yeah, and CNBC and PBS News are already reporting on potential price increases
Right.
for everything from cars to food.
Right, because those industries rely on imported materials that are now subject to these tariffs.
Right.
So if those costs get passed down to
It
consumers...
can make a lot of things more expensive.
Exactly.
It's just like a chain reaction.
It is. And it's all connected.
That's a good point. And speaking of X, people are also kind of freaking out about what this could mean for education.
Yeah, there's a lot of anxiety about that.
There is, there are concerns that, a hit to the economy could lead to cuts in education funding.
Right, because state budgets, which often fund education, are heavily dependent on tax revenue.
Right. If the economy shrinks and fewer people are working.
That means less tax revenue for states.
Right, which could lead to budget cuts.
Potentially, yes, and especially in areas like education, which are often seen as discretionary spending.
Okay, so we've got this economic downturn triggered by the tariffs.
Right.
Which then leads to less money for states and potentially less funding for schools.
Yeah, that's the fear.
What are the experts saying about how this could actually play out in education?
Well, Brookings, which focuses on social policy research, is particularly concerned about this.
Okay.
They warn that schools and universities could face significant funding cuts.
Wow.
And this could have a domino effect, impacting everything from teacher salaries and classroom resources to scholarship programs and even the availability of certain courses.
So if I'm hearing you right, we're not just talking about abstract economic numbers here.
We're not.
This could directly impact what happens in classrooms across the country.
Exactly. We're talking about real-world consequences for students, teachers, and families.
And the Tax Foundation report highlights another major impact.
Oh, yeah.
They estimate that these tariffs could result in a $1.2 trillion increase in taxes.
That's a staggering number.
Wait, 1.2 trillion? That's an astronomical number. What does that even mean for the average person?
Well, they break it down. That translates to about $830 per household in 2025.
Okay.
So think about that for a second. That's $830 less that families will have to spend on things like groceries, gas, or even their kids' education.
Wow, that puts things into perspective.
It does.
It's starting to feel like a real economic squeeze for all sides.
That's exactly what a lot of people are expressing on X, this feeling of being squeezed.
Yeah.
There's a real concern that the cost of living is going up while their paychecks aren't keeping pace.
Right.
And now these tariffs could exacerbate that trend.
This has been incredibly helpful in kind of, wrapping our heads around the potential economic impacts of these tariffs.
Sure.
But we haven't even touched on the possibility of other countries retaliating with tariffs of their own.
And that's a whole other can of worms.
It is. So we're only looking at one side of the coin here.
Right.
What happens if Canada, Mexico, and China decide to fight back with their own tariffs?
That could launch us into a full-blown global trade war.
That's a scary thought.
It is. It is.
And that's a whole other deep dive waiting to happen.
We'll have to save that for another day.
I think we'll definitely need to tackle that in our next segment.
Agreed.
But before we go there, it sounds like there are some folks out there who might actually benefit from these tariffs, right?
You're thinking about those industries the tariffs are designed to protect.
Exactly, like the steel and aluminum manufacturers.
Right.
They might see an increase in demand if American-made products become more competitive.
That's the intention, yes.
Right.
By making foreign goods more expensive, the hope is that it will encourage consumers to buy American-made products.
Right.
This could lead to increased production and potentially more jobs in those specific sectors.
So it really is a complex issue with potential winners and losers.
It always is with these kinds of policies.
We've got some industries potentially benefiting while others, and potentially the entire education system, could face some pretty serious consequences.
It's a balancing act, for sure.
It is, and that's what makes this situation so fascinating.
And so important to understand.
Because it's not a simple black and white issue.
Definitely not.
There are a lot of nuances and potential ripple effects that we need to consider.
Absolutely, and we'll continue to unpack those as we go.
It's sad.
We're just getting started. Yeah, it's like a domino effect.
Yes, right.
One thing leads to another, and,
Yeah.
and the ripple effects can be felt in very unexpected places.
Yeah, like education funding, which we were just talking about.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that economic policies don't exist in a vacuum.
Yeah.
They have real-world consequences that,
Yeah.
extend far beyond Wall Street.
Absolutely. And speaking of real-world consequences, we got to talk about the possibility of other countries hitting back with their own tariffs. What happens if Canada, Mexico, and China decide to retaliate?
That's the billion-dollar question, isn't it?
It is. It is.
Retaliatory tariffs could escalate this situation from, a trade skirmish into a full-blown trade war.
And what would that look like? Paint us a picture.
Well, imagine a scenario where, China slaps tariffs on American agricultural products.
Okay.
Suddenly, American farmers find themselves struggling to sell their soybeans and corn overseas.
Right.
That could ripple through the entire agricultural industry, impacting jobs, prices, and even food security.
That's a really tangible example.
Yeah.
It helps me understand how these things can spiral out of control.
Yeah, and it's not just about economics either.
Right.
Trade wars can also strain diplomatic relations, creating tension and mistrust between countries.
So it's not just about dollars and cents.
Yeah.
It's about, global relationships and stability.
Precisely, and that's why this situation is being watched so closely by governments and businesses around the world.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And, we've talked about the potential economic fallout, the impact on education, and the possibility of a global trade war.
Right.
But what does this all mean for our listener? They're probably sitting at home wondering, how does this affect me personally?
Right, and that's where those X posts that we mentioned earlier become so insightful. I think they offer a window into how real people are experiencing these policy decisions in their daily lives.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's one thing to hear economists talk about, GDP and inflation.
Yeah.
It's another to see someone posting about how they can no longer afford their child's school supplies because of rising prices.
Yeah. It's a good point. Those personal stories really bring that economic data to life.
They do.
They remind us that these aren't just abstract concepts. They're real challenges faced by real people.
Absolutely.
So let's bring it home for our listener. What are some concrete examples of how these tariffs could impact their everyday lives?
Well, as we've discussed, higher prices for everyday goods are a major concern. That means, potentially paying more for groceries, gas, clothing, and even things like cars and appliances.
Right.
And we can't forget about the potential impact on education. If schools face funding cuts, that could mean, larger class sizes,
Right.
fewer resources for students, and even program elimination.
It's a lot to process, for sure.
It is, but knowledge is power. The more we understand about this situation, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the challenges and, make informed decisions.
Yeah, and speaking of knowledge, I think it's important to remind our listener that we've only scratched the surface here.
Oh, yeah, we've just skimmed the headlines.
Exactly. And, there's a lot more to unpack, and we encourage everyone to, do their own research.
Absolutely. The Tax Foundation report, the analyses from Brookings and CNBC, and, those real-world stories and insights from X are all great starting points.
Yeah, they really provide a more comprehensive picture than we can offer in just one deep dive.
Right. And remember, this situation is still unfolding. Things could change quickly. So it's important to stay up to date on the latest developments.
Yeah, absolutely. Well said. So as we move towards wrapping up, what are some key takeaways our listeners should kind of keep in mind?
Well, first and foremost, tariffs are complex.
Yeah.
They can have both positive and negative consequences. And it's really crucial to understand the nuances.
We've seen that they can potentially benefit certain industries while harming others, and the ripple effects can extend far beyond just economics.
Absolutely, impacting things like education and even global relations.
Right, right.
Second, it's important to stay informed and engaged. Follow the news, pay attention to how businesses and consumers are reacting, and don't be afraid to ask questions and voice your concerns.
Yeah, because ultimately this isn't just about economics, it's about people's lives.
Right, and it's up to all of us to participate in this important conversation.
So as we approach the end of our deep dive, is there anything else you'd like to add?
Yeah, I think it's important to remember that this situation, it's kind of a microcosm of a larger debate that's been raging for decades.
You mean the debate about globalization versus protectionism?
Exactly.
Yeah.
On one hand, we have, the argument for free trade and open markets.
Right.
On the other hand, we have the argument for protecting domestic industries and jobs.
And these tariffs seem to be pushing us more towards that protectionist side.
They are, and it's going to be fascinating to see how this plays out in the long run.
Will we see a retreat from globalization, or will this ultimately lead to a more balanced and equitable approach to trade?
That's the big question, isn't it?
It is, and it's one that we'll be grappling with for years to come.
So to wrap things up, I want to leave our listener with one final thought.
Okay, I'm all ears.
Think about the potential long-term consequences of these tariffs.
Okay.
How might they shape the way Americans think about globalization and international trade in the future?
That's a great question to ponder.
And remember, this deep dive is just the beginning.
Yeah.
We encourage you to continue exploring this topic by seeking out more information from the sources that we've mentioned today.
Absolutely. Stay curious, stay engaged, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the topics that matter most.
Yeah, it really feels like we're at a turning point here.
Yeah, the situation has the potential to, reshape the global landscape.
Yeah, and it's all happening so fast.
Yeah, the speed at which this has unfolded is remarkable.
I know, it's crazy. Just a few days ago, we were talking about trade deals and, economic forecasts.
Right.
And now we're talking about potential trade wars and global instability.
It's a whole different ballgame.
It is. And, it highlights just how interconnected our world really is.
Absolutely. Decisions made in one country can have, ripple effects across the globe.
And it underscores the importance of understanding these complex issues.
Definitely. We can't just sit back and watch as these events unfold.
No.
We need to, engage, ask questions, seek out information.
Because knowledge is power, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. The more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to navigate the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the one thing you hope our listener takes away from this conversation?
I hope they come away with a deeper understanding of the complexities of, tariffs and the potential consequences of protectionist policies.
Yeah, and I hope they're inspired to continue exploring this topic on their own.
Yes, there's so much more to learn and discover. The Tax Foundation report, the analyses from Brookings and CNBC, and those real-world stories and insights from X are all valuable resources.
They really provide a wealth of information and perspectives.
And remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation.
Right, right. This situation is still evolving, and there's sure to be more news and analysis to come.
So stay curious, stay engaged, and stay tuned for more deep dives into the topics that matter most.
Absolutely. Well, thanks for joining us on this whirlwind exploration of Trump's surprise tariffs and their potential impact on the U.S. economy and education system.
It's been a pleasure diving deep with you.
And to our listener, we encourage you to keep learning, keep asking questions, and keep the conversation going.
Until next time, stay curious and stay informed.